welcome to Canada. I put it this way, I know that guy for more than 50 years. Okay, so it's the first time I read out his bio. Okay. Dr. Chi Man is a professor and chair in the history department of Hong Kong Baptist University, and his specialties in the military and naval history of modern East Asia, particularly from the Sino-Japanese War 1894 to 1895 to the 1970s. He has published Eastern Fortress, A Military History of Hong Kong, 1840 to 1970, and Hong Konger in the British Armed Forces. His work can also find it in Modern Asian Studies, War in History, and Journal of Military History. And recently, he released a number of digital humanities projects, such as the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong and a Spatial History Project. Before I hand it over to him, I want to say just 1 minute. As a historian, I always say that technology is running so fast that we have to catch it. Because last night when I'm writing about that bio, the title of the talk is The Japanese Occupation of Hong Kong from Spatial Perspective, 1941 to 1945. But today, it changed to digital method in historical research of Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, an example. So I need to say in Cantonese, 智文交俾你。
多謝家健。
Thank you.
So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation, and of course thank you very much for the library's generous support and its excellent equipment. Today, well, as you can see, and also as Gagin mentioned, it is about digital methods, and it changed fast. Yeah, that is a problem on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's an opportunity. So, what we are going to do tonight is very straightforward. It's two-part thing. The first half would be devoted to a discussion of how we do it in a digital way. Basically, we introduce spatial history as a method and the use of GIS. We talk a little bit about our research question and how do we use not just GIS but also a little bit of AI in the use of in processing our historical data, what kind of data we faced and how we deal with different kinds of data and so on. And we also talk a little bit about how we design our interactive map, in which, in fact, I would like to introduce to you one of our collaborators here, Joe Wong, who actually designed the user interface of the map, and who happens to now based in Vancouver. So if you have any digital projects and so on, you can actually talk to him. And we then turn to the Japanese occupation with a specific case, as I mentioned in some of the occasion or private discussion with you in some of the occasions, that is about a mass grave under a football pitch in Sai Ying Pun. And we use it as an example to illustrate how we use various digital methods to not just locate, but also to interpret the existence of that mass grave. And of course, we then have some discussions and observations and so on. One thing I would like to say before I continue is that at 7 p.m. I have a special task to complete. My wife, who is now in Hong Kong, teaches in a secondary school, and well, you all know the time difference between Hong Kong and Toronto. Exactly 12 hours. But that means by 7 p.m. here, it's 7 a.m. there. Today, she is going to be an invigilator for one of the public exams in Hong Kong, and she doesn't know how to get there. A school in Dai Hang, which is up the hill. So I have the task of calling an Uber taxi from Toronto to ensure her timely arrival at the scene. Thanks to the technology and all this digital stuff, it is actually possible. Yeah, may I say in Cantonese, 黐線啊，咁都得喎，即係咁都做到啊！ I really admire spatial technology. This is really crazy. You can't really imagine this is ever possible 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. right? Thanks to all these new technologies and opportunities. Anyway, so I have to help her, so bear with me if I suddenly look at the phone and look perplexed, okay? I try not to. And then hopefully, since the event will last until 8, that means we will probably have some time for discussion and so on the Japanese occupation, on spatial history methods, etc., etc. So, can you all hear me? Yeah. Excellent. So, an introduction. So, it's about the Japanese occupation, it's about the use of spatial history, and we will showcase the interactive map, and you can have a look, and this is now publicly available. So you can actually scroll to different parts of Hong Kong to see what happened in the Second World War in particular places, and then you can actually see whether you can have extra insights and so on. And if you know something which I don't know, please, I beg you, share them with me. We try to put them on the map. It's basically a depository of information about Hong Kong's experience during the Second World War. And not just Hong Kong, in fact, also China, Asia, etc., etc. And we can try to, include many different stuff. So, spatial history. Spatial history in Cantonese, 空間史, it's a term, I didn't invent the term, first of all. I didn't invent it. It's a widely used term, It's always readily available. It exists for more than a few decades already. So before I continue, let's look at some of the discussion about the very notion of spatial history. I have to say this is a little bit text heavy because we're talking about something like definitions and so on, and I was told that this particular audience is highly intellectual, so may I indulge you with the details, and technical stuff. So in short, the spatial history places the spatial context to the fore of the discussion. That means when historians, and Gagin knows very well that when historians work on their different topics, we work on events, ideas, or a particular figure, historical figure, and so on. And then this very space, that physical space, that these things happened, these things took place, are usually seen as a background. But then when we basically try to flip the whole thing over and try to discuss the very space, and as well as the things that happened in certain space, the flow of things, movements, etc., etc. And in such discussion, we place a lot more focus on the discussion of the very spatial context. Why are we doing this? It's because in many, just like this quote, in many studies, you can't just study the space. It has to be in relations to other discussions. Say, for example, if you are talking about economic history, you probably would say, if you want to talk about the economic history of, say, shipbuilding in Hong Kong, you may also want to talk about the physical space in Hong Kong, To Kwa Wan, and Aberdeen, etc., etc. The very space that those activities took place, or the very space that those movements and transactions took place, is actually also important. But it's very difficult to describe them only by words, or I'm not very good at words maybe. For some people, they can actually do it only with words, but for me, I probably would need more visual support in order to get there, to give you the idea. So spatial history is a very good tool for me to, exactly what he said, to facilitate conversations between different subjects. I'm a military historian by training, and well, you would expect if someone is trying to write about a battle, if a historian is writing about the Battle of Hong Kong, and you find a book without any maps, you probably wouldn't like the book very much. It's very difficult to read. However vivid or graphical the text can be, So you have to understand, if you want to understand the larger context, if you want to have a better understanding of the flow, you probably need a map. But maps, are maps just maps? No, they're not. They allow us to do several things, which is very, very clearly illustrated by Ian Gregory and Alistair Geddes. These points are, well, basically laid out what spatial history means, what it allows us to do. First, by putting the historical data in a very clear spatial context in the form of map or what we call geographic information system, something like Google Map, etc., it allows you to give a structure to those data so that you can explore an understanding in a spatial way. Patterns, distributions, locations, distance, proportions, all these are important in the understanding, a holistic understanding of the whole thing. And you can visualize them, put them on a map, you can see them, which is very important, especially for people like me. And you can start to analyze in a spatial way why certain things congregate together at a certain place, why is there such a pattern of distribution, how was the distance affected this and that. I think all these are important. The final advantage, which is extremely important for me as a military historian, is that you can finally really put different kinds of sources together in the same spatial context. I'm a military historian, that means I usually work with two sides. Say, for example, the Battle of Hong Kong, you at least have two sides, Japanese and the British, the garrison, if you like. So you have accounts from different corners describing the same thing, but at the same time, they may look or read slightly differently. So how do we make sense of them? You can't simply say, oh, this is the right version, this is the incorrect version. You can't do it. They are all primary sources that contains certain degree of, I won't say truth, but evidence from the past, about the past. Then how we deal with them? The GIS would allow us to put everything in the same spatial context so that we can understand them, or just cross-reference them, which is always useful. And this is basically what we do. Cross-referencing different kinds of sources without actually just pulling one source and assume this is the only way of looking at it. So I think this is extremely important. And incompatible sources as well. Say, for example, this is an official report of a battle to describe a certain action by the forces from one side. And on the other hand, you have oral history of a soldier, and then a photo, and then a video clip. If you want to write a book with these four types of sources, it's actually quite difficult to explain them and mingle them together. But in the GIS, you can place them in a very specific spatial context and understand them, not just individually, separately, but also together. Okay, all together. In the same way, data sets can also be integrated. Different kinds of data sets, who's who, telephone book, newspaper articles, description of events. All these sources can be put together in the same spatial context because they all happened in a certain space. Now we can put them together to understand the larger context. So I think this is one of the reasons why I switched to geographic information systems or spatial history since 2017. So this is basically why I would do that. And very importantly, when up to this point, you may have the impression that I'm doing something quantitative only. Well, I am sure some of you or all of you are actually interested in history, right? So supposedly history is a very humanist pursuit, artistic almost like. But at the same time, you always have the quest or the drive for accuracy. So how do we come to terms with that, or even scientific if you like? So how do we come to terms with that? I think you always have qualitative accounts, qualitative data in history. Say, for example, an oral history account, a memoir, some description, fake description of an event or some emotions. This is extremely important. But if you put everything on a map, does it mean that you quantify everything and leave them out? No, absolutely not. We're not trying to do that. On contrary, we actually try to contextualize them in a very specific spatial background. So this is why qualitative sources is actually very compatible with the use of the geographic information systems. Say if you have a community map, you can simply easily put oral history accounts, memories, so on. So this is exactly why I choose GIS. Instead of trying to give you an illusion of accuracy or scientific inquiry, no, I'm far from it. I'm not trying to do that. And I'm not saying this is impossible, but I am not trying to do that. Okay, I can't comment on whether this is possible as of this moment. I don't know, but I'm not trying to do that. So quantitative sources, qualitative sources sit actually quite comfortably in GIS, as long as you have a very specific spatial context to describe. So what do we use? GIS, Geographical Information System, straightforward. So you can basically see it as a map. Well, Google Map is a kind of GIS. You have many different brands, QGIS, OpenStreetMap, Kepler, you like it, okay? You can select any tools you work with in the most comfortable manner, okay? We use ArcGIS, a kind of software. So I'm not saying that's the only one, but I would say it's a good one. Anyway, the maps, they're not just maps. They are actually spatially referenced databases. It's very important to remember this. They are actually databases. This, you know where it is.
Right.
Yeah, Paris. And you know all these spots, the circles, all these bubbles. So you can see you have cups, shopping bags, beds, and somehow there are guns, cameras, and knives and forks. So you definitely know what it is. So this is basically the map I created for my wife in our trip to Paris a few years ago. So all these shopping bags means that where she had buy bags, more bags, okay, for the shopping bags. I'm sure we visited most of them, if not all. The guns are actually the military museums or toy shops that I would like to visit. So you can see the proportion, numbers. Yeah, as you can see. But she treats me well, okay? I'm not saying anything. So, cafes, etc., etc. So they are not just about locations. They're also about distance. They're also about, well, how do you get to the most places, most efficiently, etc., etc. It's a database. Okay, it contains different kinds of data, and you can also categorize, filter different kinds of data for your project, okay, for your need, etc., etc. So maps are maps. They're not exactly scientific. Or it involves lots of science. I'm not saying map making is not a science. No, I'm not saying that. But to present a map visually, okay, it's not just about science, okay? It's about presentation, because they contain certain information. As long as it contains certain information, it's not just a physical description. It's not just a description of physical space, because it contains some information on top of it. So this is a map about the war in Ukraine on the 7th of March 2022, it shows the Russian progress on the battlefield. So this is a Russian map. This one is made by another media, same date. So you can see the area of control looks very differently. Another map also showed the whole thing in a very different manner. Which one is the most accurate? I don't know. I have no idea, but probably not the first one. So the same date, same situation, different perspective, different presentation. So this is always possible. So before I continue, that's one thing that is extremely important and I would like to stress more, is that I'm not claiming this whole endeavor of spatial history makes the whole thing more accurate. This is not my intention. Yeah, if it looks more accurate, thank you very much. I'm happy to know. But the idea is to contextualize the whole event and the experience and give the spatial context more attention, so that we can understand the linkages or the relationship, etc., etc., rather than simply claiming that, oh yeah, now I'm making a very chaotic event simple. No, this is not my intention. In fact, the intention is reverse. My maps, or interactive maps or spatial history projects, how you call it, aims to make us understand how chaotic the situation was. Yeah. So sometimes when you look at our maps, you will have an impression that, oh, they look messy. Yeah, that's the intended outcome. Yeah, that's exactly what I want. Yes. Not yes, sir. The message reads, okay, let's do it together. She just got up. She will tell me when she is out. Okay. 30 minutes to go. Hold on, is it live?
Yes.
Really? She wouldn't know. So there goes our initial projects. In 2017 and 18, we created our first interactive map. Basically, at that time, we only wanted to create a map to tell stories. It was about the British Army Age Group, a local underground resistance during the Japanese occupation, one of the many resistance movements in Hong Kong. Of course, we also talk about the BAAG or BAG's collaboration with local Chinese communist guerrillas, etc., etc., and Americans as well. So it's a story map. Basically, it's a map-aided or map-based narrative. So it's like an interactive map, but you have little control over it. You just scroll and understand the story. So this is our initial attempt. But when we do it, we try to have a more clear spatial discussion or spatial awareness by inserting historical map on GIS. So the process is called georeferencing. In Chinese, it's called 空間對位 or 空間對準. That means you place a historical map on a GIS. So this is the first step with moving towards the recreation of the very historical space. Because when we talk about spatial history, the space has to be historical to an extent. You can't just put everything on a 2025 map and let everyone work with their imagination. This is not enough. So georeferencing is our first step. Oops, sorry. And then we moved a step further by creating a map about the Japanese invasion of Hong Kong in December 1941, the Battle of Hong Kong. This is a hand-sketched map I worked on a Microsoft Word. Yes, I do it on MS Word. Yes. And then when I was trying to communicate my idea with my team about what we are trying to do, because everyone are historians, with little technical background except for the understanding of the GIS software. And then we try to say, okay, I'm trying to make this. And they were like, okay, let's see how it goes. And then we try to create a database, a spatial database, historical military sites, okay, military relics, where the British defenses or Japanese army positions, British army positions, etc., etc. And then we put them in, we cook them together, okay. Basically make an animation that is, you can pause to see different stages of the battle. So this is actually the beta of the beta. And with the help of Joe, we created a user interface which allows a more clear user experience, which can allow people to adjust the time, look at individual units, select different layers in a clean table, which, well, it works, okay, at least to us for a while. And this is our first truly spatial history project, because we try to display, okay, the Battle of Hong Kong, the 18 days of battle on a historical map under the GIS in a very specific, to have a more specific discussion. And then my boss came and said, your map is great, but can you make it 3D? I thought, I'll try. So, and then we created a map about Xiu Hong, a Chinese writer who died in 1942 in Hong Kong. And we created a small interactive map about her footprints in Hong Kong, which were many. And we created a piece of 3D map, so georeferencing, but in a 3D terrain. So underneath is a digital terrain model of Hong Kong in 2021 or 2, I forgot. But it's very far away from Hong Kong in 1940s. So keep this in mind. But at least we tried, and we sort of created something. And then we started to move further, and well, it seems that the method works, but at the same time, what do we get from it? Because all these projects are, well, first is a story about BAAG, and then it's a story about the Battle of Hong Kong, and then it's a story about Xiao Hong or Xiu Hong. And then what do we do? Can we do something more analytical? Can we do something more critical? Can we have more historical insights from the map, rather than only trying to use the map to tell a story, which many people actually know. And if you read my book, it's more like an aid to your reading. So we are not very happy with this, and we are asked to be more critical, to have a research question in mind. How do we solve or provide additional insights by using GIS? So we created an interactive map about the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong with an open question. That is, let's put all the data together first and see what we can get out of it. So that is the idea of the interactive map about Japanese occupation. And at the same time, you have this. When I created the maps and so on, I asked my friends for opinion, and one of my friend, Kiri actually, Kiri-san actually, or Xie, she actually gave me a very, very important insight, saying that your maps are boring. So how do I make it less boring? She said, sprinkle people's story on it. So I tried to collect stories about people's experience during the Battle of Hong Kong and the Japanese occupation, and I also invited Tony Benham to contribute stories, and invited many other people to contribute some stories, and many did. And we also included some oral history accounts, and then we tried to place those stories in a specific spatial context to understand what happened to them during the war. It seems that it makes it more fun, not just that, but also it really has a much deeper understanding of their experience. And in fact, we also tried at least once of using the map to do the interview. So we invite our interviewees to look at the map together, to look at the very historical space together, and then ask questions. We'll talk about this later, okay? And of course the historical photos, just to make it fun. And at the same time, try to locate where those photos or documents related, also put them in different contexts. And we can play around together later. And of course, we started with our social media as well. It's not just for dissemination. It serves us well in the sense that it attracted many invaluable contributions to our project. And we will talk about this later. Yeah. Sorry. Sadly, the back button was placed too below, so it's actually, oh, I'm sorry. Canva. Anyway, these are the kind of historical sources we work with. First, historical aerial photos, historical maps and plans, and of course, qualitative and quantitative data from textual sources. Words, okay, or numbers. We have newspapers, Say, for example, sometimes it's very good to note that newspapers sometimes comes with figures like this, lists. For example, this is about a list of temples being used by the Japanese to have more revenues and so on. Lists, okay? This one is interesting. It's made by BAG, the British Army Age Group agents. They move around in Hong Kong and recorded which building was used by the Japanese. And it's a list of Japanese positions in Hong Kong. Super useful stuff. But just imagine if you use it to write a book. What do you do with it? Quote it entirely in the page? Lovely. And then what? So it's very difficult to contextualize the whole thing, but put these things on a map, you get something. Put these things on a map with aerial photos with specific view, you get a lot more. So much more from it. Who's who? Super useful stuff. You know what's who's who? 名人錄. Super useful. All the students who study history will find who's who very useful. And they contain addresses. And they contain addresses of their business, contact detail. And then you start to put people together. Oh, who lives next to who? Whose shop actually was next to someone's shop. And you start to look at, I'm not saying proximity means linkage. No, I'm not suggesting that, but at least you have a bit more spatial awareness and context, and which we will talk about later. And of course, phone books. I love the phone book. This is actually one by the Japanese. It's a Japanese phone book published in 1944. And you have trial records. When we look at this phone book, let's look at this phone book. This one. This phone book actually contains a list of comfort women's stations. Now, it's not a hard-guarded secret because it's a practical use. It's right next to the naval base, and the comfort stations were used by the Japanese naval personnel. Straightforward, nothing particularly special. But you have the locations, you have the addresses. Once you have the addresses, you place them on the map, you put them in a specific spatial perspective. I actually interviewed one person with the map, and I asked him to describe how he traveled to work from Causeway Bay to Admiralty. So he just walked along. And he mentioned there is existence of a very strange shop he would see in a crossroad. And he said the name of the shop is actually very strange. It's called Chai Man. So he thought he said my wife's house. He found it amusing. It's actually one of the comfort stations. And if you put these addresses together, they're actually from a crossroad. So we actually can remember things, not because of the list, not because of the map, but because I asked specifically the spatial context in which he travels, and that matches with the details of the map. So this is where you have a more clear, why does it come from? Where does it come from? It's because when I listen to many of the oral history accounts, you will find that the interviewers often lacked the spatial awareness or very knowledge. And sometimes you have interviewees when they try to describe, I don't know whether you talk to people, when they try to describe, oh yes, in the past few days, yeah, in many of our conversations with Gagin and Cindy, you would mention place names to me. Or among your discussion, you would mention place names. But if someone doesn't understand where those places are, it means nothing to them. The same happens when, say, for example, Imperial War Museum interviewed the veterans or those who experienced the Second World War. If they're not from Hong Kong, or if they not enough from Hong Kong, they wouldn't understand. Jane, you moved past Taiwan many times. But for another expatriate who stayed on the other side of Hong Kong Island and never set foot on the eastern part, he wouldn't understand. So this is exactly the importance of the spatial context and spatial awareness. And then sometimes we were assisted by AI because all these accounts, they're in words. The easiest way to extract them, well, OCR, this one is a very old model. Okay, this is a very old way of using it. We just use Gemini, old version. There's a thing called Vertex, 2 years ago. And you just OCR the text, and I can show you how it was done. And sometimes it can really handle very complex text, very complex list. So this is a Japanese address registration. So during the Japanese occupation, the Japanese authorities actually asked everyone to surrender the registration, not the property themselves, but the registration. So they have to list out the details of this and that. And at the same time, they confiscated many of the so-called enemy properties. That means properties owned by the Allied powers or Allied power personnel or Chinese. And then they made lists like this. It's kind of interesting. You have, street number, lots number, ownership. This one is Kaduli. And nationality, the first registration day, is just from the old registration numbers and so on. Who occupied it, and then the structure, the status of the structure, so how many buildings, how it was built. So this one was built by bricks, four stories, 3 blocks. And then next to it you have valuation, etc., etc. So how do you just put it in an AI with very clear prompts, okay? You have to write it very clearly, and then it can very easily generate the whole list. It can read it, yeah. And this is a very old model. I made it last year. So nowadays we have our own in-house OCR platform with our own way of doing it, which, well, I would say a lot more efficient than this, but without all this beautiful visual of things moving. It gives you the sense that it is moving. Well, our version doesn't have it, but it gets things done. Anyway, you can see the words. So it's not in the crazy words, at least they come out with a list, which is handy. How can I press the button without actually... Oh, this again. Anyway. So the workflow is something like this. With a text, image, we OCR the whole thing, we extract them as lists, and then we can simply assign a location to them, which is called geocoding, and then basically give them a latitude and longitude. And then with the list, with the latitude and longitude, we chuck them in the GIS, and they will become a data layer. So this is basically what we do. And that's why you have a map with so many dots on it. Okay? So it's semi-automated. So it's not all by hand, one dot after another. Oh, many of them are actually done in this way because the addresses are not very clear, or it needs more spatial awareness, which AI cannot provide. But many of them are actually done, well, in a semi-automated way. So this is how Vertex work. Anyway, so this is how I dealt with the sources and the technical part. I'm sure this is boring. So now we move on to the less boring part, which is about the goals. No, I have to explain the workflow a bit more first. So this one. So we basically put different kinds of sources, textual, graphical, cartographical, and qualitative data in the GIS. And we have a very complex workflow for addresses. This is actually very difficult to understand. Let me explain a bit. First, all the addresses in Hong Kong either have the street number, lot number, or at least the name of the terrace. 以前有好多台，乜乜台，乜乜台, that's terrace. Okay, sometimes it's just 19號東山台. So it's not a street, it's not a lot number, but it's within a certain terrace. So usually it comes in these 3 ways, and then we try to see if they have an actual location that we can pinpoint on the GIS. So this is basically our workflow. Only a small number of locations which would become approximate location. That's unfortunate because we simply cannot 100% sure where it was. So some of them are actually like this. Say for example, an event. you can't pinpoint an event because, say, for example, an air raid against ships in Victoria Harbour. But we still have to place it on a GIS. So it's just 1 point on, well, Victoria Harbour. And then this is kind of sources we work with. Nowadays, we have the AI model that can deal with this complex layout. Because when you do AI-assisted OCR, one thing that is important, you can't simply put it in Gemini and expect it to roll out the form in the same format. So you have to break it down in format first and do the OCR step by step. And of course, all these street maps, street plans, super useful. Nowadays, we can simply georeference them in the GIS and have the exact street number to work with. So this is a very useful tool we created last year by using AI to OCR the whole street index. And now we can, you can search, you can actually have access to this database. It's called Historical Address Database. So basically it gives you the location of the places, historical places, the addresses that no longer exist, but it can give you the location. Yes, and it's a converter of historical street number and historical lot number. Why do you need it? Because in many archives, the record only exists as lot number rather than street number. If you don't know the street number and lot number, or if you just know the street number but not lot number, you can't find anything in an archive. So you need a converter. And we OCR the whole 1938 street index to give you a converter with that. Without AI, how much time do we need? 2 years. With AI, how much time do we need? 3 months. But not very fast, but fast enough to be useful, I would say. And now this is our, this one is good. This one is our latest OCR model. We call it 有燈. Yeah. So you break down the format first, and then you extract the words. And it identifies pictures, photos with text. So you try to differentiate between the two. With all these things, we roll out an interactive map about the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong in 3D with the use of aerial photos. Aerial photos are super useful because on a map, it only contains certain degree of details. Sometimes it's not enough for you to have a really clear spatial understanding. But aerial photos are different because you can zoom in to the maximum and see the actual houses. Okay, I will show you. And then the usual lovely user interface created by Joe, in which you can have all these selection of different types of data, different layers of information, the map in the middle, and of course the information on the right. So it's the left-right thing, which is very handy. And it works on phone, it works on iPad, it works on your desktop computer. But unfortunately, my experience in Canada shows that certain type of Wi-Fi doesn't work with, particularly not working with iPad tablets. You can use it on your phone, you can use it on with a stable line on your desktop, but somehow an iPad with Wi-Fi doesn't always work with my maps. I don't know, but Jane, yesterday you did well with the map, right? In the big iPad. Yeah, I don't know, it depends. It depends on the, I thought it was some sort of error from my side, but it turns out it's more like a internet speed thing, okay? So keep this in mind. I mean, if you bump into trouble, it's not always us. Anyway, so this would be the part about the ghost stories, okay? It's finally we are the ghost story. So why do we need to use so much time to explain how we do it? It's because it seems that without those methods, it's impossible for me to actually unearth this story. This is most important. Secondly, I would like to suggest that the use of these methods would help us to understand the Japanese occupation deeper, I would say. Yeah, a lot deeper, in fact. And rather than simply retelling the same stories that you probably have heard of. Yeah. I'm sure all of you heard about the Second World War in Hong Kong. You all know about the Japanese occupation and so on. And yes, I'm aware of time. So after all these details, okay, I would like to share with you a case, okay, in which we recently did on using all these different methods to actually try to not just find or recover or rediscover, if you like, but also more importantly to interpret what happens in the Sai Ying Pun football pitch. Anyway, so you all know the context. Hong Kong was under Japanese occupation for 3 years and 8 months, 3年08個月. So the very word 3年08個月 became something like a catchphrase if people from Hong Kong would like to describe a catastrophic situation. 好似3年08個月咁慘, something like that. Okay, we used the term since then. The city was, well, in a horrible position in August 1945. After 3 years and 8 months of Japanese occupation, the population suffered from all sorts of problems, disease, hunger, bombing, etc., and general brutality of Japanese rule. The Japanese rule was brutal, absolutely brutal, because of many reasons. First of all, because of the fear that they were overwhelmingly outnumbered, and at the same time, they were ruling a hostile population with so little manpower available. And at the same time, Hong Kong was nominally under the general headquarters of Japan, imperial general headquarters of Japan, but actually the so-called headquarters was too busy to do anything for Hong Kong. So basically the city was left to its own devices, particularly in terms of food. So the city was almost starving when Japan surrendered in August 1945. At the beginning of the war, okay, Hong Kong had a population of around 1.5 to 1.7 million. It's a very packed city back then. And when the Japanese took over the city, they realized that they could not feed the population. So they systematically pushed the people out, forced so-called evacuation. So by the end of the war, when Japan surrendered, the city had a population of 500,000 to 600,000. We don't know the exact number, but that's the general estimation. Where were the rest of the people? They were not all dead. They were basically pushed away from Hong Kong, many resettled in different parts of China, and some actually were rounded up by the Japanese military police, known as the Kempeitai, and shipped out to different parts of China. But some of them were actually left at the sea or sent to uninhabited islands, left to their own devices. So it was a horrible period. But many survived. Many also survived. At least 500,000 were still in Hong Kong when the city was liberated. So the story, you all know the general outline of the story. But today we just focus on one particular aspect of the story. That is called emergency burial grounds. So one dimension of the Battle of Hong Kong and the Fall of Hong Kong was often overlooked was the attempt of all sides to take care of the population. What you would all probably expect in the middle of such chaos and war, the civilians would be basically left to their own devices, left alone. Not exactly. In fact, the government before the war actually have many different provisions to try to take care of the population. I'm not saying they did everything, they did a good job, but at least they did what they could. One of the dimensions was the designation of emergency burial grounds in different parts of Hong Kong, particularly Hong Kong Island, to bury the dead, because they expected the city would be under intense Japanese air raid and bombardment during the siege. So they designated places within the city, so that when the urban area was bombed or destroyed, when you have lots of casualties, you simply don't have any resources to move those bodies to the cemeteries outside. in the suburb, say for example Taiwan, say for example Aberdeen or Kai Lung Wan. You don't have the resources to do that, but you couldn't left them on the streets because they would spread disease and so on. So the only way is to find places to bury them in the middle of the city. That means parks. One of those burial grounds was the King George V Memorial Park, which was designated to be the park since 1936, when King George V died. So the park was a commemoration of the late king. Since then, okay, the so-called the park was become so-called haunted. Many ghost stories surrounding the park emerged. I'm sure you heard about it. 高街 and 佐治五世公園. So it's always known as a haunted place. But for many different reasons though, because many would expect that it was because of the mental hospital above it. Many would expect it's because of the actual hospital below it. So the place was between two hospitals, Sai Ying Pun Hospital and High Street Mental Hospital. And in the middle was the playground. And some also know that, it was actually quite well known that it was also so-called mass grave, right? Being used during the Second World War. So we know a bit about it, but we don't know the details. So how can the method we just described help us to understand and interpret the whole thing? So that is the research question. But then there's one problem. It is now a park, public park. I would almost like to say it's a waste of public resources if I just come out and tell the government, can I dig up the ground and see if there's body inside? I can't do it. It's not very economical, isn't it? And I wouldn't do it because it disrupts every people's life. And let alone if you actually find something. How do we deal with it? So we are trying to devise a non-invasive way to do it. So that is why all the digital means comes up. So this is the park. If anyone lived in Sai Ying Pun area for some time, oh, you did. Have you been to the park at night? There's a football field up on top of it. You didn't play on it. What's a waste? You should go there at night. Should be fine. Many actually play football there, don't worry about it. Nothing really bad happens. Anyway, you can notice the ramp going up the park. Remember this ramp. And well, of course, the place with social media, with YouTube, etc. This place was always being mentioned in ghost stories. Okay, 猛鬼 and 鬼故, this and that. People talked about it. 老伯俾公園女靈纏身多年 ，don't know. 大頭怪嬰，香港龍脈聚陰之地。Wow. So this is basically what we do. Okay. First, we have some archival sources about the park, about the emergency cemetery, and so on and so on. But we are extremely fortunate in the sense that we used the map and the aerial photo in an oral history interview of a 92-year-old gentleman who happened to be a civil engineer after the war. So he understands aerial photos, he understands street maps. Although he's very old when I was doing the interview, he's still able to conceptualize the spatial context and describe what he saw in the interview. This is extremely important. And at the same time, we are even more fortunate to bump into an account, a written account of another gentleman who lived in Sai Ying Pun. So two accounts, one written, one oral, one with the spatial context, one also with a spatial context but without my intervention. And we were also very lucky to obtain aerial photographs of the area taken during the war. So we try to piece all these things together to see if we can have a better understanding of the whole thing. So let's look at the accounts, Pun Guang Liang and Lau Man Seng. So two gentlemen, they both described the mass grave in the garden, but in a different way. So this is Pun's account. So Mr. Pun was, well, a Hong Kong resident, lived in Hong Kong since the 1920s until his death in early 1990s. His grandson was very, very, very kind to let us to have a digital copy of his grandfather's full account of his life in Hong Kong. And these pages were, he wrote, well, several sections on the Japanese occupation and the Battle of Hong Kong, and these paragraphs, okay, were about his life concerning food in particular. So let me do some sort of a translation, okay? For those who can read Chinese, you can read it yourselves, and I can do a bit of translation. So first, he mentioned that rice from Annam, Vietnam, Indochina, could not be sent to Hong Kong because shipping was no longer available during the Japanese occupation. All ships were sunk by the Allied submarines or planes, or being used for other purposes rather than shipping rice to Hong Kong. As I said, the Japanese High Command would not allow this, but they saw it simply as a waste of their resources. So no food for Hong Kong. So he said, people who cannot buy extra rice for themselves, or simply cannot buy rice for themselves, started to use yam and 西提粉, I don't know how it's called in English, but all these supplementary food, but it's not very healthy, it's not very useful as food, so they try to well, keep themselves less hungry, okay? So why was there a shortage of food? As I said, no shipping. But why wasn't there the rationing? You all heard about rationing. The Japanese introduced the rationing in Hong Kong right after taking over the city. But in fact, in April or March, I forgot, 1944, the Japanese stopped the whole system because they simply did not have enough rice for that. So that means only those who work directly with the Japanese would be able to buy all this rationed rice. For the rest of the population, you just, you just try to get your own food. So he said many try to, eat pig food, or ma mian, or I don't know what ma mian is called in English. And then lots of, semi-starved people along the street. So his home was at Yuan Fuk Li. He said, 死亡者日幾數起, so there are several people starved to death in his neighborhood, and the public mortuary at Sai Ying Pun was the 花園仔運動場 and become a mass grave. So he simply said the garden next to the hospital became a mass grave, and he said it was very, horrible sight, blah blah blah. 香港歷史上所未有嘅, so it's never seen in Hong Kong history. And then on the next page he said, some of the Japanese military police, the Kempeitai, would forcibly ship people out of the city and let them starve to death on islands or their own boats. And then 幸而如當時仍作清道夫，雖微不足道，亦算有業務傍身，得以渡過此難關. So he survived because he worked as a janitor on the streets. So during the Japanese occupation, he faced a choice: either go back to his hometown in Qiulin, or would try to survive in Hong Kong with his wife and his children. So he was literate, but he didn't want to serve the Japanese. So he became a janitor. So he said, it seems that he's not actually helping the Japanese, he's actually helping the city, and it's enough money for him to feed his own family and survive. And so he did. That's his family. That's Mr. Pun, that's his wife, these are the children. The photo was taken after the war, so he survived. Of course he survived. His account was it's a very long account until the early 1990s. Another account was an interview, which I did in 2023 with Mr. Lau. So The context was I did a very long oral history interview with Mr. Lau about his life during the Japanese occupation. So I asked questions specifically about his work, how did he try to get to work, and so on, and the situation around his home, where it's at the beginning of the war and occupation he lived in Causeway Bay. In the later half of the war he lived in Sai Ying Pun. I forgot why he moved, but yeah, so he did. Anyway, so that's what he said. The Japanese, well, he referred them to turnip heads. So were many people at the time, 蘿蔔頭, used it to handle the corpses. And then he took a piece of paper and tried to draw the cart in front of me because he's a civil engineer. So he basically said the people used a cart. Such a cart can actually, well, you can jack up the back of the car, the front of the cart, so that the bodies would slide into the mass grave. And then he described it, and then unload items downward, so the turnip heads would use the cart to collect the corpses, take them to what is now the mental hospital on 4th Street. So he said, he gave us a general location, mental hospital. But he didn't very specifically say the park. And then I just guided him, because we were looking at the photo. Both of us were looking at the photo and the map. High Street Mental Hospital, and then he draws the area. And then he took another paper and drew another map himself. So hospital, High Street, Eastern Street, blah blah. They would dump the corpses into a hole. He specifically mentioned a hole, like a well. And then they would drive the cart over there, jack up the bed of the cart, unload the corpses into that spot. And then he mentioned that back then the area was already a park. So a hole in a park. So basically is a more specific description than Mr. Pun's account. So Mr. Lau mentioned a hole, Mr. Pun mentioned a park. So what is it now? I don't know, blah, 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 blah. And then he mentioned if you were to dig deeper, you may find some bones. Well, I couldn't do it, so let's see. So with all this information in mind, you can at least know two things. First, it's in the Sai Ying Pun Park, KG5, King George V Park, and then you have a hole in a park during the war. And then during the war, there were many aerial photos taken by the US Army Air Force over Hong Kong, because they were trying to find targets to bomb, to destroy, particularly both sides of Victoria Harbour. These photos were then stored in the USA for almost like 80 years without any people actually studied them. We were very fortunate to get hold of some of them from 2022 onwards and still collecting them. And then we find a very clear photo of the park taken by the US Army Air Force in February 1945. So let's look at the map first. So this is the map we created. We georeferenced the aerial photo on a GIS with a digital terrain model. But this time the DTM was different. The digital terrain model, that means a 3D part, comes from a 1963 aerial photo, which the Government Lands Department did an excellent photogrammetry, and which allow us to place the aerial photo on top of a 1963 terrain. And between 1945 and 1963, there is very little change in terrain. So it's not like you place a 1945 photo on a 2025 terrain, which will look very different and incompatible. Anyway, that's the result. So you can see the photo, you can see this particular photo was taken in 1943. Anyway, so we overlay everything, okay? So this is the area, Sai Ying Pun, the area in question. First, this is the park, as you all probably are aware of. So the High Street Mental Hospital is here, the black one, this one. This beautiful building up above was the Bonham Road School, 般咸道學校. So it's like staircases. Sai Ying Pun Hospital was here. This one is Sai Ying Pun Hospital. And down below, as you can see, there's a packed tonglaos for the working class people. These were most likely, most of them actually, home of the coolie class or lower middle class or the lower classes people who worked along the warehouses. Yeah, nowadays it's all gone, but back then it was rows and rows of warehouses. So that is why, for the Japanese, this area was called Zhongqin district, because Zhong is warehouses. So in many places during the Japanese occupation, they named the places after their function. For example, Tsim Sha Tsui was actually called, I forgot the Japanese, I'll get back later on, Chao. It's not 香臭個臭, it's 三點水嗰個臭. Chao in Japanese was harbor district for Tsim Sha Tsui. So many different districts, they have their different names, related to their function, related to some of the physical feature. Anyway, so this is the Sai Ying Pun area. Let's look closer. Where is the hole? Right here. One way of looking at aerial photograph is looking at the shades. So you can see the long shade here. So that means it's a vertical fall and then flat ground. Remember the ramp? This is the ramp where the carts were pushed up. And that's the hole where the bodies were dumped into. How about the rows next to it? You can see rows and rows of seemingly tilted grounds next to it. What are these things? Yeah, you would guess is vegetable garden. That was my estimation at the beginning, and I was proven wrong. I'll tell you more about this later. This one is a dismantled, partially dismantled hostel for the nurses of the hospital. So this one is High Street Mental Hospital. This one is Sai Ying Pun Hospital, the complex, 2 buildings. And 醫院道 Hospital Road runs this way, and the park and the hall. We call it a pit, okay? And this is Sai Ying Pun Market, Sai Ying Pun Market, 街市. Oh, one thing about Hong Kong public structure is that once it's a market, it's always a market. Nowadays, it's still a market. Okay? It stays the same for almost forever. Okay, we'll talk about this later. Now, is the football pitch. With GIS, it's like super easy to do this, to do an exact layout comparison. So that means it's this side of the field. So if I were you, if you really want to ever play football or at night, play the other side. Not this side, the other side, you probably, but on that side you may have numerical advantage, I don't know. I have no idea. So the park stays the same, the hospital stays the same, the pitch became a football pitch. Okay. So let's look at the 3D version. So you have access to the map. I will give you a QR code. You can play around with it. Oh yes, it's called Minato, Minato district. Yeah, and Zhongqin is called Gula Zen. Gula is Zhong, Qin, Zen. Gula Zen. Gula is warehouses. Okay. So let's remove the street names, the feature names, and so on. Let's remove the feature. Let's look at the map. Let's look at the park. So that's the park. And if you do a 3D version, so this side of Hong Kong Island, you all can recognize it, right? So you're just simulating a 5+ over Hong Kong. Okay. So you can clearly see the spatial distribution of the wealth as well. The richer people live on top, on the upper parts of the hills, and the poor people lived down below. And in the middle, there's a separation. And basically the park was closer to the poor side of the city. Okay? So that's basically the spatial pattern. And our PolyU friends actually did a ground penetrating radar survey of the football pitch, because we finally are able to pinpoint the location of the pit, right? So that's what they scanned it. They scanned it a bell-shaped anomaly at 2.4 meters in depth. So they found the pit, basically. They found the pit. They did. And the pit matched the size of the aerial photo. That's that. So that's the 3D rendering. And well, the image was basically our image, but the 3D was their scan. So basically they found the pit, which largely matched the aerial photo. So it seems that we found the pit, but then here comes another question. Who were buried? Who were buried? At the beginning, I relied on the first two accounts, those who starved to death, right? Straightforward. But then I realized they actually had records. Yes. And I was very wrong in assuming that the pit was the only mass grave, because the list was created between the beginning of the invasion, Japanese invasion, and the first month of the Japanese occupation. There were already more than 2,500 bodies, entries in the record. So we put them in our OCR platform, did an OCR, created a list, and we found a very interesting thing, that is, most of the buried did not have a name. They were unnamed. But then they have an age though. Why do they have an age? I have no idea. But they didn't have a name. Yeah. Some of them are wrong. This is 1941, okay? Many of them were sent to the burial site from Donghua Hospital, which is nearby, okay? It's 3 blocks away. And many of them are actually those who died in different parts of Hong Kong. A small number of them from the eastern side, most of them were from the western side of the city. But there's a problem. More than 2,000 bodies were already there during the first month of the Japanese occupation. But Mr. Lau and Mr. Pun mentioned the pit and the burials were about the starvation towards the end of the war, during the final months of the Japanese occupation. So apparently, there were actually 2 graves in the same site. Let's revisit it. The pit described by Mr. Lau was the pit. We can confirm that almost. Mr. Pun also mentioned people were buried because of starvation. And then let's look at the vegetable garden. They were actually mass pits. The earlier burials, when Hong Kong was still under the British, you have a systematic mass burial in lined pits. They were called casualty pits. And many of those were in the casualty pits were unnamed. They were, civilians died during the Battle of Hong Kong and the early month of the Japanese occupation, when the Japanese troops took over the city. They started looting, they started shooting at people, the campaigners started to shoot at so-called looters, and then bodies would keep flowing in. And those who ran this cemetery still at work until they were being reorganized or told to go home by the Japanese in late January 1942, 1 month into the Japanese occupation. So that's why you have 2 graves here. First, the entire area was one mass grave, housing more than 2,000 bodies. In the entries, they have records, they have the numbers. and an unspecified number of people buried in the large pit. Okay? Well, we did some calculation. That large pit could house at most 300 bodies. But we don't know how many were there. We don't know how many were buried. There's simply no records for the second part of the burials. So that's it. That's largely about the story. At the end of the war, they did a, exhumation. Because, oh, by the way, before the exhumation, right after the war, the pit was filled, people started living on it. Yes, it became a squatter right after the war. People started living on the grave. Until in 1948, after the government announced we are going to exhume the bodies, people started moving out, and the government helped the people to move out and moved many of them to North Point. Many of them didn't want to go to North Point because they were coolies working down below the warehouses. So only a few responded to the invitation to move to the North Point. Anyway, so let's get back a bit about who were buried. So we know who were buried during the Battle of Hong Kong and the early months of the occupation, but we still want to know who were buried in the large pits. So I created another map about the walking distance between different parts of the city and different parts of Sai Ying Pun. The red area was the walking distance of 10 minutes for the two hospitals in the area. This one was Donghua Hospital. It's a free hospital. The other one is Sai Ying Pun Hospital, which actually you have to pay in order to get treated. So most of the people can only use Donghua Hospital, the one on the right-hand side, okay, at this side. And the red dots were rice shops for the poor. Those places you can get rationed rice until 1944, mid-1944. The yellow dots were Japanese or Taiwanese residences. So that means the Japanese themselves and the collaborators and so on. So they lived on top. And the purple area notes the walking distance of those rice shops. That means the coverage of the rice shops, where people can reach the rice shops at 10 minutes walk. So you probably won't go too far away to get rice, so that's the general coverage. So you can very clearly see the difference between the rich people and the poor people. Those on top of the hill, you can see lots of houses not covered by anything. Does it mean that they don't need rice? Yeah, basically, because they don't need rationed rice. They had their steady supply because they were the Japanese when they worked for the Japanese. So they did not have to have the long queue or pay for the rationed rice. They were given rice by the authorities. And those down below, they were very likely those who suffered from starvation and those who were buried in the pit. So that's basically my estimation, if you like. And in the middle, between the rich and the poor, I also saw one more observation. That is, look the hexagons, the green one, the green hexagons. These were religious institutions, churches or temples, etc., etc. During the Japanese occupation, the religious institutions bore the frontline work of relief, helping the poor. So you can actually see the spatial arrangement of this in this part of the city, in which the poor and the rich people were separated by a line of almost like a defensive line of religious institution separating the rich and poor. So not just vertical difference, but also a line holding the boundary. Anyway, so this one is more clear. The orange ones was the line. You can see they almost runs like a line between the rich and poor. The blue ones were the rice shops. The light blue ones were where the Japanese lived. So why were the Japanese living there? Well, because they occupied the British houses. They expelled the British or Allied people or the rich Chinese, and they occupied those houses. So that's where originally the rich people lived. So you can now see the spatial pattern. And in the middle, you have the green star here. That's where the Japanese army detachment was. So they guarded exactly at the entrance of the rich area, separating the poor people out. And you would guess most of the people who died of hunger would be simply sent to the pit, the large one, during the Japanese occupation. But then there's another problem. In 1948, when the bodies were exhumed, they announced that they found 2,600 bodies. Where did the number come from? I have no idea. There's two possibilities. First, they simply checked the record and said 2,600 were buried and we dug up everything. That's one theory. The other theory is that they actually did a thorough excavation and counted the number of skulls. I very much doubt that. I don't know, because this is crucial, because that means, was the cleaning thorough? If it was thorough, if you dig it up, you find nothing. If it is not thorough, that means you can still find stuff inside. But I have no idea. I just leave it open, because while I'm an academic, what am I? So it very quickly became a squatter area and very quickly became a park. There's almost like a tacit agreement in Hong Kong where people would not like to live in places where mass deaths or burials take place. And there was actually a common practice of avoiding to build in those places. Once you have a mass death event, it's most likely they would turn it into a park, because no one wants to live there. Who would want to live there? Except for when you don't know about it. Wan Chai, Hong Kong, those places were thoroughly bombed by the Allies. More than 1,000 deaths took place, but they still are almost like some of the most prime properties in the area. So if you don't know it, it doesn't exist. But one thing I would like to note is that the stories persist. Ghost stories, those memories, those unclear memories, or those unexplained deaths, they survived as stories. It was physical ruins were removed, filled up, bodies were exhumed. I don't know whether thorough or not, but this is not a very important question. In fact, even if it's not thorough, you probably don't want to move it. It just stayed there. The stories exist, passed along the generation. And at least in one occasion, I was told by someone who lived in the area that in a school next to, in the Sai Ying Pun area, one of the people who experienced the war became a teacher and passed along the stories. She told the students what happened in the park during the war. So at least once I heard about it. And the neighborhood, the Gai Fongs, knew about it as well. But for the people who don't live in the area, if you just try to learn about it from YouTube, it becomes high street ghost stories. Or Sai Ying Pun hospital ghost stories. Or 女鬼前身老伯. I don't know whether you should be happy or not. There you go. The park. This one was actually an air raid precaution tunnel. So it's a shelter inside. It's now blocked. Another portal is down below. So there is a ramp going up on the other side. So this is the wall. The retaining wall remained largely the same. Okay, and the burial ground would be somewhere there. So next time when you walk past it, don't do it at night, because there are so many different passages you can go up, okay? So try not to use this. And Hospital Row is not very suitable. It's too long anyway. So, that's what I want to say, basically. It really allows us to have a very clear... So I am not trying to debunk anything, no, not really. I'm trying to contextualize and explain what happened and try to guess who would be the most likely victims because of the spatial inequality, which you can see from when you use GIS in a more analytical or critical manner. So that's basically the attempt. Some observations. First thing, the Japanese occupation was a very, just don't look at the words, listen to me. The Japanese occupation was a very complex event in which the physical space of Hong Kong actually witnessed much transformation. It lasted only for 3 years and 8 months. Supposedly it's very short. People wouldn't expect, but in many of my talks, people did ask, were the Japanese build any houses in Hong Kong during the occupation? Yes, they did. Were the Japanese transformed the landscape of Hong Kong? Yes, they did massively. Look at Kai Tak. But sometimes some of the transformations were more subtle, but it's no less important. For example, Sai Ying Pun football pitch, the park. So you can look at these things. And you don't only look at the top collaborators. Well, in many of the accounts about the 3 years and 8 months, you look at Luo Yukwo, you look at Chen Linba, all these prominent collaborators. How about the rice shop owners? Were they collaborators, or were they people only trying to survive and help the city run? Was it collaboration? I don't know. But this is actually the grassroots control by through food is a very important dimension of Japanese control of the city. Remember, they had a tiny garrison throughout. When Japan surrendered, the total number of Japanese in Hong Kong was 15,000 with 4,000 soldiers. That's it. The city still had 500,000. Half starving, of course, but you know the difference in number. So food is a very important means of control. So it's not just 六兩四, it's a spatial control. And spatial factor also determined resistance or the absence of it in different areas. In the urban area, in the rural area. In rural area where the Chinese Communist guerrilla was very active, it also had its spatial context, which allows its active resistance and freedom of movement. In the urban area, situation might be different, and you have different forms of resistance. So this method, I would say, really helps me to really look into it in detail. And, well, a few words on spatial history as method. First, you always want to ask a question when you try to do spatial history, rather than just simply tell a story. I learned it in the hard way. If you create a very expensive map just to create a story, no academics would want to talk to you, let's put it this way. And as you can see, in the first half of my presentation, which I spent 40 minutes on, the workflow was important. Just imagine if we don't have all these GIS, AI, etc. How can I actually squeeze so much detail in a GIS and then did all these so-called spatial analysis? Almost impossible. So cross-referencing is essential, as you can see. The phone books, registration records, burial records, aerial photos, maps, oral history accounts, personal memoir. You put everything together. And of course, fixed description, super useful. The two accounts, Mr. Lau, Mr. Pun, well, they probably didn't actually exactly describe the size of the hole or the previous, the wartime emergency burial ground, blah, blah, but they didn't know it. They didn't know all these things, but they at least pinpoint what happened. And this is essential. And of course, OCR, super useful in our case. Well, there's another thing which is pure of academic interest. It's actually quite difficult to have papers published with this. I wrote a paper about it, and it's now being reviewed. So fingers crossed, fingers crossed. I don't know. So this is the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. And this, as I said, it's not really ghost thing. You don't have to be afraid of it, unless you actually live next to the grave. This is the QR code to the map. So if you're interested in the map, you can use it. Does it work? I have no idea. Does it work? Well, I'm sorry about this. It works exactly like Google Earth. Yes, the control works exactly like Google Earth. 3D, zoom in, zoom out, a view, point of view, etc., etc. Works exactly like Google Earth. So you can play around and look at Hong Kong in 1945. And yes, let's move on to Q&A. Thank you very much. She said, give 5 stars to the driver. Lovely.
Don't forget to give them a tip.
Yes. I should get a tip, I think.
Do you still need a phone?
Nah. I mean, no. I probably won't.
Thank you, Chi Man.
Okay.
Now, when we look at a map, we all know that we are now in Toronto. It'll be quite far away from here to your home. And the time is running out. At first, I have 2 questions to ask Chi Man, but on the other hand, I think it's good for you to ask first, and I round it up with my 1 question rather than 2 then. With time limit, I think we can open to the floor for 3 questions. Except the student, I will ask it for you. Okay, don't worry. Anyone for the first question?
So, what prompted you to look into mass graves?
That's a good question, thank you, because it was not my first intention. No. In fact, when I received the aerial photos, I simply did not know it's a mass grave. What happened was that when I was doing the transcript of Mr. Pun's account, he specifically mentioned the mass grave. And then it prompted me to remember the discussion I had with Mr. Lau using the photos. So it was a very haphazard process. I first received the photos, didn't see anything of interest in that area because I couldn't understand, because I keep looking at Hong Ham and Wan Zai and so Tai Gu, where places were bombed, or Kai Tak, where you have massive redevelopment into an airfield. And then when I interviewed Mr. Lau, he mentioned mass grave, and I worked with him to locate it. And then you know what? And then I just forgot about it. Yeah, I didn't follow up. And then when I was working with Mr. Pun's account, and then I remember, yes, and maybe I should insert a screenshot. And then I found it. Oh God, that's the hole. Okay. And then I get back to the project, and then I started to do the archival search. And then I found the record of government claiming the recovery of 2,600 bodies from the mass grave. I was like, oh no, this is actually big. And then I wrote a paper. And then I submitted it, and then I received the feedback, and when I was doing the revision, I don't know why though, when I was doing the revision, I suddenly realized, oh no, there might be burial records. Because, you know, the Hong Kong burial records were actually available online. You can find it. Yeah, there's a website called Family Search. Yes, you can find the burial records. And then I said, do they have records? Maybe, let's look into it. And then I look at the records, oh no, they actually have it. And then I have to tell the editors, give me a few days. And then I have to rework the manuscript, because they actually have the records of the first part. But for the large pit, it's still largely unsolved. That's why we have to do some interpretations based on the spatial analysis to guess who were buried there. And then that's the paper. So it's a typical process when you don't really have a very specific question in mind, but you generally you have a question. Yeah, it leads you to the, yeah, it's something like a detective story thing. Yeah, piece of evidence after piece of evidence. Yeah, thank you. So I didn't specifically look into it. And by the way, hold on, sorry. By the way, I found more graves. Yes, Hong Kong U playground, and let's look at it later. Yeah, anyway, second question. Yes, Hong Kong U playground, yes.
So all the playground would be very suspicious.
There were only 6. burial sites, official burial sites. Okay, two of them were basically nobodies. The one on the eastern side of Hong Kong Island is now part of the hill, so you can't really see it. Hong Kong U playing field is now redeveloped into Hong Kong U playground. 嗰個叫咩啊 ？Sports ground. Yeah.
Where exactly? Sandy Bay or Hong
Sandy Bay. 係。應間我帶你睇。
You just answered my question. I was going to ask, what
Other sites.
the other sites were
Yes.
located.
Yes. The second question. And maybe this gentleman first, and then that gentleman. Yes.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. As a military historian, I think you might have heard of Gulo, and I think they collected a lot of photos and stuff like that. Is there any collaboration with your projects and when you do your research as well? Because I think they do a map photo and then they map geolocated as well. What kind of collaborations are interesting?
Yeah, David helps me a lot in other research projects. I didn't tell him about this because I'm publishing a paper, so I don't want to tell everyone until it's in reviewing process. But then I gave him the entire aerial photo set. That's why I think earlier this year, he did a long YouTube video talking about how he found things in the aerial photo, the photo I gave him. So he worked with it. We collaborated in the sense that we exchanged sources. Yeah, it's a very happy exchange, happy collaboration in which he would see things that I simply don't know. And I would probably help more with the Chinese side, non-British side of things. So if you look at Gulo, it's excellent, but it's mainly expatriate British experience oriented. I'm not saying it's all about it, but yes, mainly that side, or the elites, Chinese English-speaking elites. But my work would cover a little bit more than that, and of course the Japanese sources, and so we collaborate we complemented with each other's work, which is good, and many others too. Say Tony Benham, Mr. Tim Ko Tim Kwong, who is the man. Yeah. So it's not just Gulo. Gulo has a big website, but we actually stand on the shoulder of giants like Lau Yunwo, Boxy, and Tim Kwong. You have long generation of historians of Hong Kong, who many of them may not be so-called academically trained, but they have the awareness of space, where people in Hong Kong usually are very sensitive to space because it is limited. So this is actually a tradition. Rather than, as I said, I'm not inventing something new, but I just make it more efficient. Yeah, thank you. And the gentleman there.
So my question is, what is your reaction of the Hong Kong civilian back in the time when they get bombed by Allied force? Because there are thousands of casualties made by the Allied force, and how they react to it, and any examples that people are being buried in the graveyards. Thanks so much.
Thank you. As far as I know, first, I cannot categorically say Hong Kong people, because it depends on where did you see it. So for those who directly experience it, I'm not sure I'm sure they probably would not be very happy. You have accounts about Allied prisoners of war cheering when the city was bombed, and then you have Japanese soldiers set them. And then you have an account of a school headmaster about school children from a school on the island cheering when the armed American bombers were bombing the ships in Victoria Harbour, despite the danger. And of course, you also have angry accounts, well, some of them in Japanese newspapers, about people condemning the Americans for bombing. But they were published during the war, so you probably have to be more critical about it. So you have many different accounts. So I would refrain from giving a categorical comment on reaction. You can't represent, well, more than 500,000's reaction. I can't say whether they're happy. I won't say they were happy. No, it's wrong. I won't say they were not happy. It's also wrong. It must be somewhere in between. So it depends where and when and what was their experience. Normal. Second thing, where were they buried? For those who were killed in Kowloon, say for example Hong Ham, many would be buried in Ho Man Tin cemeteries. Yeah, Ho Man Tin. At that time there was a big cemetery in Ho Man Tin. There was a bigger one called Number 7 in Kowloon Bay area, but that was not used during the Japanese occupation. I don't know why though. The Japanese concentrated their Kowloon burials in Ho Man Tin cemetery, and then their Japanese dead were sent to a crematorium in Kowloon Zai. Yes, they sent that. For the island, those who were killed in the area would be most likely sent to Taiwan cemetery. Some of them were buried in Kailongwan as well, and some of them were buried here, KG5, maybe, but not many. I would say that pit, that large pit, could probably hold around 300 bodies, not more than that. Otherwise, it would be like super packed. We're not very sure about. Yeah, there's a possibility that they were buried in a very extended period in which decayed bodies were stacked over by fresh bodies. So that would allow more packed bodies. It's not like one massacre in which all the bodies were intact and thrown together, occupying the same space. If you put it in an extended period, the first group would be decayed, and then you have second, third, fourth layer. So that would allow a lot more packed situation compared with a single event. But I cannot comment on this because I did not have any records. Yeah, the only thing is the pit, the 2 accounts, and the burial records of the rest. So it's as usual, history is complicated. Yeah. Maybe we can do one.
Yes.
The last one.
Just a quick question. What's the limitation of using the spatial information or the aerial photo in terms of area? As an example, in new territories, would that be also very clear aerial photo on those parts of the city?
唔好意思，卡傑嚟洗洗。
Thanks for the extremely important question, because you probably noticed that I almost never mentioned the new territories. Not intended though, because there's so many things to say. Oh yes, sorry. NT. During the war, the only set available was either a very blurred American set in 1945, and this set taken by the Japanese in 1942, late 1942 I would say. It's a 1 to 12,000 in scale. It's actually quite good in quality, but it didn't cover everywhere. As you can see, it's a row and row and row. The original plan shows that the Japanese took pictures of the entire territory, but unfortunately only 2 rows survived, so that's why you can see only 2 rows here. And as you can see, it's actually quite good in detail. For example, you can see a train here. This is actually a train. So for train guys, so you were very happy to see. This is super long, 30 something carriages. And then this is actually Fan Lang Station. So this is actually Fan Lang, On Lok Chun. Yeah, Fan Lang Orphanage, and so on. And Quân地馬場, Quân地race course, the 個墟啊，粉嶺嗰個墟啊, and so on, and 上水. And so on and so on. You can see the moat of a walled village, 啲圍村嗰啲咧, and ancestral temples, lots of field, and this is actually the Fan Lang Golf Club area, and you can see the governor's residence. What is it? Somewhere I forgot. This one, yes, the governor's villa. 即係個港督別墅 is here. And back to the question of limitation. Oh, lots of them, lots of invitation, just like any other historical method and approach. First, it's impossible to get everything. Yeah, it's never complete. Records are never complete. As I said, Japanese photos. I very much would like to see the rest, but I cannot find it. Presumably it's in Japan, but it's a lot more difficult than I imagined. Secondly, if you are into the type of fake description to the extent that you look into ideas, feelings, emotions, or senses, which are all popular topics nowadays in historical inquiry, these cannot do much. It just gives you context. But it's important in the sense that it gives you the context to understand those things. So I think it's useful, but it's not 100%. Yeah. So my suggestion would be to get as much as contextual information as possible, and then look into the original inquiry. So it goes back to the original slide in which spatial history serves as a conversation to other studies, other inquiries, rather than stand alone as well as a one solution for all. Yeah. Thank you. And Gakin, yeah, let you do it here. I do it here.
Well, you better sit back. You'll be standing. I give you this. Since I will see you next month for lunch, and I will meet you in your office next month again, I will, what Maria say, always passing the torch. So I give my chance for the last questions to the student back there, and then just you have the chance to ask the last questions.
You have students here?
Yes.
Oh, really?
I give him a class already.
Why do you still study history? Why do you still study history?
I don't know why. I can't say because usually when people like get entering history, it's like you already like giving up your life. In some sense, especially today, like yeah.
Really, I still survive.
Hopefully I can survive.
You will better than I do. Yes, your question.
Okay, so the first question is like several days ago I discussed with another PhD student. Like we are very curious about the cost of the whole project. Like because as you can see, for like US photos or like aero stuffs and then like all these. Like not for an interview or like cost for people like actually the photos as I can imagine they're very highly expensive in a sense. So the first thing is how much about this, and then very material cost. And then another question is during the Japanese occupation, like not much accounts talk about like the books collection in the Hong Kong University, which I'm researching such because I discussed this topic with another PhD candidate here that talks about actually there was a large lump sum of books collection that were transferred from Hong Kong University of Hong Kong libraries later to the UBC actually, and that sort of that book collections actually stamped as like something like this, and then like I'm very curious of are there any like sources in Japanese that talk about they took away these collections of book collections during the wartime, and then like how they transfer and how they decide what to take or what to leave it here. That's all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, two questions. First, I answer the first question first. The cost. The human cost is staggering. I spent so much time on it. Spent so much time supposedly with my family on it. So the cost is definitely high. But the material cost is much lower than you think. Yes. Since we have already paid for you. So nowadays, if you like to work on spatial history, it's very easy. The map itself is free. Yes, that one was of course expensive. The photos are like super expensive. The GIS is expensive. The manpower to make it available is also expensive. The technical part is also expensive. We have to train our own people. In Baptist history, we have a course called Spatial History, Introduction to Spatial History. Our students have to learn how to use all these to create small interactive maps like this. We gave them the freebies, of course, the aerial photos, maps, etc. They created it in 13 weeks. So people can learn to do it. So it's not like extremely high threshold, no, not really. But the human cost is quite high. But I won't say it's much higher than other studies. No, not really. The photos are one-off cost. I pay for you all, so you don't have to pay for it. And government, Hong Kong government is actually very generous. The post-war photos, 63, 76, 82, they're actually freely available. So all you have to do is to get yourself a reliable GIS software, chuck those photos in, get the results. So we don't own them, the government owns them. And it makes it's the open data policy, allow the people to use it for free. So the cost is not as high as you think, I would say. Second question, the books. Oh, I did bump into the list. Because after the war, you're not the first one who worked on this. Someone actually wrote a PhD out of it. First, there was a list of books confiscated by the Japanese as calculated by the British after the war. The list is available in the Public Records Office. And I will try to look into it to see if I can dig it up for you again, because the first people asked me was 7 years ago. I have it, but give me some time, okay? I can dig it up for you. 有㗎. And secondly, the Japanese accounts. As far as I know, I did not bump into any. But the process was like this. When Hong Kong fell, the Japanese troops seized all book depositories in Hong Kong, including some of the larger bookshops, to search for anti-Japanese materials. And they confiscated all the books and sent them together to a place, Fong Ping Shan Library. In Fong Ping Shan Library, the Japanese authorities nominated several local and Japanese scholars to look into it and created the list of all the books. So you have a process of discarding the anti-Japanese materials, discarding the anti-Japanese materials, took away the useful and valuable stuff to Japan, and then send the less useful but kind of meaningful stuff to Lady May Institute.梅夫人婦女會, where it was converted as the Japanese 市民圖書館, the public library of the occupied territory. It's the only public library available in Hong Kong during the Japanese occupation. It was opened in 1944. Well, most of the visitors, as you would expect, would be Japanese and maybe some of the elite locals. And those books would have a stamp of 市民圖書館. Some of them can still be found in Fong Ping Shan. Yes. And then after the war, the GHQ, the General Headquarters of Allied Occupation Forces of Japan, ordered Japan to return those stuff to all the victims, Hong Kong included. So all the countries made claims of how many things were being looted by the Japanese, including things in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, the list was very long, ranging from fire engine to books. Yeah, everything they requested. Oh yes, the Japanese loved the fire engines. Super useful. They didn't have those because right before the war, Hong Kong imported the most one of several more advanced fire engines from the USA. Yeah, and the Japanese just took them. And printing machine of Zhonghua 書局. Yeah, so they took many of the stuff away, and then most of the books were returned, as far as I know, and you probably should read Chen Guanbo's diary. Oh yes, that's that. Chen Guanbo's diary. I think the green version is better.
Yeah, because they're
Do you have the?
They're the full set and they're the version.
This is a truncated version.
Yeah, because there is a full version. But if you want to ask the story of Fong Ping Shan books, where they were during the occupation period, and also those books from the Nanjing, they were temporarily stored in Fong Ping Shan so they were shipped to Japan as well. So remember the Chen Guanbo, he's the librarian of Fong Ping Shan during the wartime.
Do you have the long version here?
Yeah,
the long version. So that
Chen Guanbo日記 was published by his 女婿謝榮滾 for 2 times at least, a truncated version and a full version. The green one is a full version, contains lots of detail. Yeah, and fun to read, in fact, fun to read. The recovery process, the process when he tried to do the list with the Japanese, the pressure under the Japanese, his brother was actually arrested by the Japanese and later died, and so on and so on. Yeah, that one, yes, this one, super interesting. Yeah, the privation he experienced, the suffering. Oh, speaking of which, he also mentioned Allied bombing. Yeah, he wasn't particularly happy or not happy about it. I think at that time the most prevailing mood would be fatalism. It's war. You don't see the end of it, so it's not always about emotion, probably, or a very static feeling rather than ups and downs in emotion. That's my, I don't know, people have different emotions and reactions. Yeah.
Because she is very passionate about books.
Yeah.
So in this concise version, she of course, she has in the joy.
And do check out Xiu Xi's work as well. Xiu Xi Lu Xi's work.
Right, definitely. She has a short article explicitly to talk about the books. 一段書往事 a story about recycling books during the war time. So it's very worth reading.
Write about it. Yeah. Kind of interesting. Yeah.
So Atlantis, your boss have the books. So apart from the assignment I gave you to do the next 6 weeks, you have another assignment to do the next 6 weeks. Before we come to the end, talking about Chen Guan Bo, I think I gave a talk, not mentioned about the books, mentioned about tempura. Yes, he said tempura is so expensive and also it's not very good taste. Okay, I think it's come about 8:20 already, and I once again thank you very much for you all coming, and thank you, Professor. Next few weeks, I will ask my 2 questions. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.